The distress beacon hit Earth's orbital sensors at 3:47 in the morning, and Lieutenant Caleb Drew was the only one awake to catch it. He almost didn't. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, and his eyes kept drifting toward the dark window of the monitoring station, watching rain streak down the glass in long gray lines. The sensor array beeped once. He ignored it. It beeped again. He sat up. The signal wasn't from any human craft. The encoding was wrong in a way that made his teeth hurt just looking at it. Not broken, just built differently, the way a left hand is different from a right. He ran 3 verification passes before he accepted what the screen was telling him. It was a ship. It was entering the atmosphere, and it was going down fast. Caleb grabbed his radio and started running. The impact site was 40 miles east, in the flat scrubland outside of a small town called Darrow, New Mexico. By the time Caleb reached it with a 4-vehicle response team, the sun was just beginning to push orange light across the horizon. The craft had carved a clean furrow through half a mile of desert before stopping. It wasn't burning. It wasn't in pieces. It had landed badly, but it had landed. Caleb was the first one to reach the hatch. It opened from the inside before he touched it. 3 figures stepped out. They were tall, taller than any person he had ever stood next to, with pale silver skin and eyes the color of deep water, the kind of blue that exists at the bottom of things. They wore identical gray garments, plain and rough-stitched, the kind of clothing made for function and nothing else. Their wrists were marked with thin black bands, flush against the skin, clearly not decorative. Their posture was careful. The word that landed in Caleb's chest before his brain could organize any other response was not alien. It was afraid. They were afraid of him. As the one in front, the tallest of the 3, spoke first. The language came out like layered sound, 2 tones running at once the way a chord runs under a melody. Caleb's radio translator hummed, took 4 seconds, and then gave him something he could use. "We do not resist," she said. "We know the protocol. We are ready to be processed." Caleb stared at her. "Processed," he repeated. "Yes. We were in transit. The ship failed. We understand we have arrived in unregistered territory. We do not resist." He looked at his team. His team looked at him. Nobody had trained for this. There was no protocol for this. There was a binder back at the station labeled Contact Scenarios, and Caleb had skimmed it once, 2 years ago. And it definitely did not cover 3 silver-skinned women stepping out of a crashed ship and offering to be processed like packages at a sorting facility. "What's your name?" he asked the tall one. She blinked, like the question seemed to confuse her more than anything else he might have said. "I am Unit 7 of the 3rd consignment," she said. "That's not a name." "No," she agreed quietly. "It is not." Her name, as it turned out, was something that sounded in her language like 2 notes played at once, which the translator rendered phonetically as Lyra. The second was called Saya. The third, the youngest looking, who had not yet spoken, was called Neva. Caleb learned these things over the next 6 hours, sitting on the rear bumper of his truck while his team set up a perimeter and waited for someone higher up the chain of command to call back with instructions. Nobody called back for a long time. So Caleb talked to Lyra. She told him, with the careful precision of someone reciting facts rather than living memories, that she and the others had been part of a consignment organized by an interstellar trading body called the Varathi Collective. The Varathi operated across 14 star systems and dealt primarily in biological assets. That was the phrase she used. Biological assets. She said it without flinching, which told Caleb that she had said it many times and had stopped hearing what it meant. They had been transported under contract to serve in the household of a high-ranking family in a system 2 jumps from Earth. The ship carrying them had suffered a cascade failure in the drive system during their 3rd transit. The crew had abandoned the vessel. Lyra had gotten to the controls because she had watched the crew carefully for 3 months and had learned enough to keep the ship from simply dropping out of the sky like a stone. She had not told Caleb that part to impress him. She told it with the same flat tone she used for everything else. Caleb was the one who sat quietly for a moment afterward, turning the image over in his mind. A woman in gray, each teaching herself to fly someone else's ship while chained at the wrists because the crew had run and someone had to. "You saved them," he said, meaning Saya and Neva. Lyra looked at him. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her water-blue eyes shifted, just slightly. "I kept the ship from falling faster," she said. "That is not the same thing." "It is from where I'm sitting," Caleb said. She looked at the ground. She didn't respond. He got the sense she didn't know what to do with a sentence that meant something good about her. The call finally came at noon. His commanding officer, Colonel Diane Pell, her voice carrying the particular tension of someone who had been awake since the moment the beacon hit and was now deeply unhappy about all of it. She told Caleb that the situation was being elevated to a federal interagency response, that people with considerably more authority than him were being scrambled, that he was to hold the site, maintain calm, and under no circumstances was anyone to leave. "Yes, ma'am," Caleb said. He walked back to where Lyra was sitting in the shade of the truck. Neva had fallen asleep against Saya's shoulder. Saya was watching the desert like she expected something bad to come across it. "More people are coming," Caleb told Lyra. "People from my government. They're going to have a lot of questions." "And then?" Lyra asked. Caleb didn't have an answer. He had a feeling. And the feeling was that this was the beginning of something enormous, and that nobody on Earth was ready for it. "And then we figure it out," he said. Lyra nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they have learned not to believe good things, but want to leave a small space open for them anyway. Neva stirred in her sleep. She said something in the layered tongue that the translator didn't catch. Saya answered her softly and put an arm around her. Caleb poured the last of his cold coffee into the dirt and watched the sun climb higher over the desert and waited. Something had just changed. He could feel it the way you feel a shift in pressure before a storm. That strange quiet that means the world is rearranging itself. He just didn't know yet into what. The federal response arrived in 3 black vehicles, and one very tired-looking woman named Dr. Carol Lynn, who was apparently the government's leading expert on non-human contact, a job title that until 48 hours ago had been almost entirely theoretical. She had short gray hair, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who had spent a career preparing for something everyone else treated as a joke, and was now grimly unsurprised to be proven right. Caleb gave her his full report in 11 minutes. She listened without interrupting, which he appreciated. "The wristbands," she said when he finished. "You said they're flush against the skin." "Yes, like they were put on before the skin fully formed, or like the skin grew around them." Carol's expression did something complicated. "Have they tried to remove them?" "I didn't ask." "Ask." He asked Lyra that afternoon, while Carol's team set up a proper temporary facility in the largest of the response tents. Lyra held up her wrist and looked at the band with the mild detachment of someone examining a piece of furniture. "The bands cannot be removed by the wearer," she said. They are compliance tools. They monitor location. They can deliver correction if the wearer moves outside a permitted boundary or fails to follow a directive. Correction, Caleb said. Pain, Lyra said. A specific frequency delivered through the skin, calibrated so that it does not damage but does not allow you to think of anything else. Caleb looked at the band. It was thin, elegant almost, if you didn't know what it was. And right now, are they active? I do not know. There is no signal from the collective. The ship's transponder is dead. It may be that the bands are simply waiting. Waiting for what? For a new owner to register us. The words sat in the tent, like something dropped from a height. Carol, who had been listening from across the table, set down her pen. That's not going to happen, she said. Lyra looked at her. It was the first time she had looked directly at Carol. Nyar and the steadiness of it seemed to catch Carol slightly off guard. Your government may not have that authority, Lyra said. The Vorathi Collective operates under agreements with 17 systems. They have enforcement mechanisms. They don't have enforcement mechanisms on Earth, Carol said, because we've never agreed to anything with them, which means their agreements don't apply here. They may disagree. They're welcome to, Carol said, from very far away. Something shifted in Lyra's face, not a smile, more like the ghost of the idea of one. Saya was the first to crack, not emotionally, but linguistically. She had been listening to the human staff around the facility for 2 days, and on the third morning she said something directly to one of the younger analysts, a man named Pete, who had been nervously trying to learn a few words of her language with the help of the translator. She said, making clear, if accented English, "Your pronunciation is terrible." Pete stared at her. She stared back. "But the effort is noted," she added, and went back to her meal. Pete came to find Caleb 15 minutes later, slightly dazed, and reported this development. Caleb went to find Carol. Carol went to find Lyra and asked how long Saya had been able to speak English. "Since yesterday," Lyra said. "And you?" A pause. "Longer." Carol put her glasses on and looked at Lyra over the top of them. "How much longer?" "Since the first morning," Lyra said. "When you were talking to the lieutenant, you speak clearly. The structure of your language is not difficult." Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the tone of someone genuinely impressed despite herself, "You've been running your own translation this whole time." "I wanted to understand what was being said about us," Lyra said. That seemed more important than being polite. Caleb, standing just behind Carol, had to look at the ground to keep from grinning. Neva was the complication nobody had anticipated, not because she was difficult, but because she was 15 years old. She looked older. All three of them did. The silver skin and the watercolored eyes and the bone structure that belonged to something older than humanity made it hard to map their ages onto human scales. But in the files recovered from the ship's damaged database, Carol's team found the consignment records, and Neva's age was listed clearly. The meeting that followed was brief and volcanic. Caleb stood in the back and watched 3 federal officials, 2 lawyers, and Carol Lynn debate for 40 minutes about jurisdiction, interplanetary law, and what exactly the words minor and personhood meant when applied to a non-human being. In the end, Carol simply said, "She is a child. We treat her like a child." That's the end of it. Nobody argued after that. Neva herself was unaware that she had become the center of a legal firestorm. She was in the next tent, teaching Pete to say good morning in her language, correcting him with the patient exasperation of a child who has been doing something since birth trying to explain it to an adult. It was the first time anyone on the team heard her laugh. It was a sound like two small bells, briefly and then gone. Pete came out of that tent 2 hours later, looking like a man who had just decided he was going to learn a new language, no matter how long it took. Caleb was the one who told Lyra about Neva's age, and what it had meant in terms of how the facility was now thinking about all three of them. Lyra listened. She said nothing for a long time. "You are protecting her," she said finally. "We're trying to," Caleb said. "The Vorathi did not," Lyra said. Just that. No elaboration. The 3 words sat between them, and Caleb did not ask her to go on, and she did not. He had gotten good at leaving her silences alone. On the 5th day, Carol received the first formal communication from the Vorathi Collective. It arrived through a relay channel that nobody on Earth had known existed, which suggested the Vorathi had been watching longer than they had let on. The message was polite, precise, and explicit. It requested the return of 3 registered assets. On it noted the value of continued peaceful relations. It attached, at the end, what was clearly meant to be a legal document. Carol read the entire thing. Then she drafted a response that took her 45 minutes to write. It was 6 sentences long. Caleb read it over her shoulder. The essential content was, "No, and if you send anyone to retrieve them, we will consider it a hostile act. And Earth does not recognize your contracts. And have a good day." Carol sent it without CCing anyone above her. Caleb thought she might be his favorite person he had ever met. Lyra asked that evening what the collective had said. "They want you back," Caleb told her. "And your government?" Said no. Lyra was quiet for a moment. Outside the tent, the desert wind was doing its slow work on everything. Somewhere, Neva was still making Pete repeat words until he got them right. "No one has ever said no before," Lyra said. "Well," Caleb said, "until someone did today." She looked at him then, the full weight of those water-deep eyes. And it was the first time she looked at him, like he was something she was trying to understand rather than something she was waiting to receive an order from. He looked back. Neither of them said anything. The wind pressed against the tent walls. The Vorathi's second message arrived 12 days after the first, and it was not polite. It came through the same relay channel, but this time the tone had shifted from diplomatic to something with more teeth in it. It listed in careful detail what the collective considered to be the legal obligations of any territory harboring registered property. It used the word property 11 times. Carol counted. She marked each one with a red pen and taped the printout to the wall of the operations center where everyone could see it. "Motivation," she said, when Caleb asked why. The team was growing. Not just the federal response personnel, but a wider circle now. Linguists, xenobiologists, a pair of aerospace engineers who had been quietly losing their minds over the crashed ship's drive system, and 3 diplomats who had flown in from the State Department and immediately started having hushed arguments with each other in corners. The facility had expanded from 4 tents to a low cluster of prefabricated buildings at the edge of the Darrow scrubland. And the small town nearby had begun to notice. Darrow had a population of about 800 people. It had a diner, a gas station, a hardware store, and a woman named Grace who ran the post office and knew everything that happened within 30 miles before it happened. By day 9, Grace knew there was something going on out in the flats. By day 11, half the town knew. By day 14, a handful of locals had started leaving food and water at the facility perimeter, not asking questions, just leaving things. Caleb found a covered dish of tamales at the gate one morning and spent 10 minutes trying to figure out how to log it in the incident report. Lyra had been given a small private room in the main building. It was the size of a storage closet and had a cot, a chair, and a window that looked out at the desert. She spent long hours at that window. Caleb sometimes found her there at the end of his shift, not restless, or just watching the flat land change color as the light moved across it. He started bringing her coffee. She thought it was strange the first time, too dark and too bitter, but she held the cup like it was something she was being trusted with. By the fourth morning, she was waiting for it. It became a quiet and uncomplicated ritual between two people who were navigating something enormous and had found, between them, a small, ordinary thing to hold on to. Saya had started working with the linguists. It turned out that she had a structural memory for language that made the human researchers vibrate with barely contained excitement. She could reproduce any phoneme after hearing it once, and could identify grammatical patterns in under an hour. She had grown up as the assigned interpreter for the household she served, which meant she had been forced to learn 6 languages before she was fully grown. She spoke about this with the same flat practicality she applied to everything. The linguists, who had not yet figured out that her lack of affect was protective rather than constitutional, kept trying to frame it as a gift. It was a tool they needed me to have. Saya told Dr. Aaron Fry, the lead linguist, when he called it remarkable. They did not give it to me because it was good for me. Aaron Fry went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Carefully, does that make it less yours?" Saya considered this for a long time. "No," she said finally. "I suppose it does not." After that, she worked with him differently, more present, like something had shifted from obligation into something that was, tentatively, hers. Neva had started drawing. Someone had left a sketchbook and pencils in her room, and she had taken to them with a focused silence that kept everyone gently out of her orbit while she worked. But the drawings were extraordinary. Precise architectural diagrams of the ship's interior, detailed maps of star systems, and then, gradually, other things. People. The people around her. Pete, mid-pronunciation disaster, his face scrunched in concentration. Carol, reading, glasses in hand. Caleb, sitting on the bumper of his truck in the desert with a cold cup of coffee. The horizon behind him going orange. She gave that one to Caleb on a Tuesday without saying a word. He looked at it for a long time. "This is good," he said. Neva shrugged with the careful nonchalance of someone who had been told not to need praise but wanted it anyway. He taped it to the wall of his office. The wristbands had gone dormant. The aerospace engineers confirmed that without the collective's relay signal, they were inert. But removing them was another matter. The technology was layered under the skin in a way that required surgical precision that Earth medicine couldn't yet safely provide. Carol had brought in 2 specialists who had spent a week studying the bands through imaging before concluding they needed more time. Lyra had been present for that conversation. She had listened to the specialists explain their caution and then said, "Take whatever time you need. They have been there for 14 years. I am not in a hurry." 14 years, and the specialists had exchanged a look. Caleb had looked at the floor. 14 years. She was 31 years old, and the bands had been on her since she was 17. Caleb had done that math without wanting to. He kept doing it. On the 16th day, 2 things happened. The first was that the State Department diplomats announced they were pursuing a formal declaration at the interplanetary level through a body called the Concordance of Free Systems. That Earth was asserting full legal personhood for all 3 individuals. The paperwork would take months. The assertion was immediate. The second was that Caleb, walking back from a late shift, found Lyra outside. Not at the perimeter, just outside the main building, standing in the desert dark, looking up. The stars were extraordinary out there. Away from city light, they were thick and close, the kind of sky that made you feel the size of things. He stood next to her without saying anything. "I have looked at that one my whole life," she said after a moment, pointing. Her finger traced toward a cluster that Caleb didn't have a name for. From the ship, from every place they took us, it was always there. I used to think it was watching. "Maybe it was," Caleb said. "That is not a scientific statement." "No," he agreed. She lowered her hand. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "In my life, I have never not known what came next. Because it was always chosen for me. Now it is not, and I don't know what to do with that." Caleb thought about this carefully before he answered. "Neither do I," he said. "Not for my own life either. Most of the time I'm just doing the next right thing and hoping the one after that becomes clear." She turned and looked at him. In the star-thick dark, her eyes were a deeper blue than usual, the color of water at the very edge of night. "You found us," she said. "You were the first one there. Why did you stay?" He considered lying. He considered something deflective and professional. Then he said, "Because you looked scared, and someone should have." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned back to the stars, and he stood next to her, and neither of them spoke again for a long time. And that was somehow enough, and more than enough, and the beginning of something neither of them had a name for yet. The concordance of free systems was, in Dr. Carol Lynn's words, an interplanetary governing body with excellent intentions and the structural efficiency of a committee that had never agreed on a lunch order. It had taken 3 weeks just to get Earth's petition entered into the formal review process. The Vorathi had filed a counterclaim within 48 hours. There were now 17 different parties withstanding in the case, most of whom had no particular interest in Lyra, Saya, or Neva, and every interest in how the ruling might affect their own arrangements with the collective. Carol had started drinking her coffee black. At the facility in Darrow, life had developed its own strange rhythms. The original temporary response team had thinned as the weeks stretched, replaced by a smaller, more permanent group of specialists. The prefab buildings had been upgraded with actual insulation and decent lighting. The diner in town had started running a weekly special they called the Outer Limits plate, which was just a particularly good chicken sandwich. But the name had stuck. Saya had started teaching a voluntary language class for the research staff. She sat at one end of a long table with a whiteboard behind her, and her arms crossed in the patience of someone who had survived worse things than adults, mispronouncing basic phonemes. Enrollment had grown from 4 to 14 in 2 weeks. Aaron Fry sat in the back row and took more notes than anyone. Neva had claimed a corner of the common room. She had a proper drafting table now, with real art supplies, and she was working on something large and complicated that she hadn't let anyone see in full. She blocked the view with her body whenever someone came close. The project had been going on for 11 days. Pete had been gently rebuffed 6 times. He was keeping count. Lyra had begun a different kind of project. It started with a request to Carol, made with the careful precision that characterized everything Lyra did. She wanted to understand Earth's legal structure, not generally, specifically. How it handled personhood, what rights were attached to it, how courts worked, how precedent was set and by whom and on what basis. Carol had handed her a stack of books and 2 tablet computers loaded with legal databases, and Lyra had disappeared into her room for 3 days. When she emerged, she had a list of questions that took Carol 2 hours to answer. Then Lyra had another list of questions, then a third. "She's building a case," Carol told Caleb when he asked what they were working on. "For what?" "I think for herself, and for the other two." Carol paused. "She's not waiting for us to save them. She's building arguments to save themselves." Caleb thought about a woman in gray, watching a crew's hands on unfamiliar controls for 3 months, learning to fly a ship because no one else was going to. "Yeah," he said. "That sounds right." It was on a Thursday afternoon, during what had become a quiet standing appointment between Caleb and Lyra in the small break room where the good coffee maker was, that she asked him something directly for the first time. "Do you believe we will win?" she said. She was holding her cup with both hands, a habit she had developed, though she never explained it. "At the concordance?" he said. "In general." Caleb set down his own cup. "I think you're going to regardless," he said. "Whether the concordance rules your way or not. I think you've already decided you're not going back, and I think you're the kind of person who makes things match their decisions." She looked at him with that steady, examining quality she had, the look that took things apart gently. "You say things like that," she said, "as if you know me." "I've spent 2 months bringing you coffee every morning," Caleb said. "I think that earns something." "It earns familiarity," she said, "not certainty." "Fair," he said. "Then I'm familiar enough to guess that you're going to be fine." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The edge of one, the shape of one, the shadow of a smile that was considering whether it was safe to be a real one. "You are, incidentally, very strange for a soldier," she said. "I'm technically a lieutenant," he said. "The distinction does not resolve the strangeness." He laughed. It surprised both of them. She looked at him like she was cataloging the sound. The concordance delivered a preliminary ruling on a Wednesday. Carol read it aloud to the assembled team, and then to Lyra, Saya, and Neva, with Aaron and Pete hovering in the doorway. The preliminary ruling found that Earth's assertion of personhood raised valid jurisdictional questions that superseded the Vorathi claim of property. It did not rule fully in Earth's favor. It did not rule against it. What it did was create a 60-day review period during which the Vorathi could not take any action to recover the 3 individuals, and during which both sides would present formal arguments. It was not a victory. It was a delay. Saya said something sharp in her language that the translator rendered approximately as well, that is, 60 days more than nothing, and sat down. Neva said nothing. She went back to the common room and the large drawing that no one had seen. Lyra stood very still for a moment. Then she said, to Carol, to Caleb, to the room, 60 days. Then we make our arguments. We're already working on them, Carol said. Good, Lyra said. I have some additions. The additions were substantial. Over the next 2 weeks, Lyra produced a document that the State Department lawyers read with an expression Caleb could only describe as respectful alarm. It framed the case not around Earth's laws, not around human concepts of personhood, but around the Vorathi's own legal code. Lyra had found, buried in the collective's publicly available charter, a clause about autonomous cognitive agents that had been designed to protect high-value artificial intelligences from being claimed as property by rival parties. She had spent 3 weeks determining that the clause, by its own definitions, applied to biological beings of sufficient demonstrated independence. The lead State Department lawyer, a woman named Dr. Phyllis Cho, read the whole thing twice before saying, "Where did you study law?" "I didn't," Lyra said. Phyllis Cho looked at Carol. Carol looked at the ceiling. "She read our legal database for 2 weeks," Caleb said from the corner. "The Varathi's legal database took 4 days," Lyra said. "Their filing structure is less organized." Phyllis put on her glasses, picked up the document again, and began making notes in the margins with the focus of someone who had just realized the situation was more interesting than she had thought. It was Pete who finally solved the Neva mystery. Not deliberately. He simply walked into the common room at the wrong time, or the right time depending on perspective, and saw the full drawing before Neva could turn it. It was the night sky. Specifically, the night sky over Darrow. The one that was thick with stars the way city skies never were. It was enormous. It covered a full 6 feet of paper taped together, precise and detailed and alive. And in it, worked into the patterns of stars, were the faces. Carol reading, Saya teaching, Lyra at her window, Caleb and Lyra standing side by side in the dark, looking up. Pete stood there for a long moment. Neva stood with her back straight, waiting for his reaction. "It's the best thing I've ever seen," Pete said. Neva looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the drawing. "Yes," she agreed. "I think it might be." She gave him a corner study of her own face that she had done and discarded. He took it home and framed it the same day. This was perhaps the least professional thing that had happened at the facility. And nobody, not Carol, not Phyllis, not Caleb, said a single word about it. There were 31 days left in the review period. The arguments were being sharpened. The collective was preparing its own case. 17 systems were watching. And in the break room on a Thursday evening, Lyra told Caleb something she had not told anyone. When the ship was falling, she said, "I was not brave. I was not determined. I was simply the only one there, and I did not know how to stop." She said it matter-of-factly, like a correction to a misunderstanding. "I know," Caleb said. She looked at him. "And yet you called it saving them." "It is," he said. "You don't have to be brave for it to count. You just have to do it." The corner of her mouth moved, the shadow of the smile again, closer this time. "You are very persistent," she said. "It's been noted," he said. Outside, the desert was dark and the stars were extraordinary. And somewhere in the common room, Neva was adding one more figure to her 6-foot sky. The concordance hearing was held in a neutral orbital station above a planet that neither Earth nor the Varathi controlled, which meant that Carol Lynn spent 14 hours in transit crammed into a diplomatic shuttle with Phyllis Cho, 3 junior attorneys, and a thermos of coffee that ran out somewhere around hour 9. Lyra was with her. The decision to bring Lyra had been debated intensely, with 3 State Department officials arguing against it on grounds of security, logistics, and what one of them called optics, by which they meant they were not sure how the concordance chamber would respond to the individual at the center of the case sitting in the gallery and watching. Carol had listened to all of it, and then said, "This case is about her right to be present for decisions that affect her life. She will be present for this one." That had ended the debate. Saya had stayed with Neva. The 2 of them were not alone. Caleb was there. Carol had wanted Caleb on the shuttle. He had told her, with the particular calm of someone who has made a decision and doesn't intend to revisit it, that he thought he was more useful on the ground. Carol had looked at him for a moment, then at Lyra, then back at him, and said, "Yes, I suppose you are." with an inflection that communicated she understood exactly what she was actually being told. The day of the hearing, Caleb and Neva played a card game that Neva was inventing in real time and whose rules kept changing, which Caleb was increasingly convinced was deliberate. Saya sat nearby and read a legal brief without turning pages very often. The facility was quieter than it had been in weeks. Even Pete, who was usually the ambient sound of the place, thus was subdued. In the orbital station, Carol and Phyllis presented their arguments over the course of 4 hours. The Vorathi representative, a tall being with amber-colored skin and the manner of someone who had been very certain for a very long time and was beginning to experience the first hint of doubt, responded with counter-arguments that were legally precise and emotionally inert. The Chamber of the Concordance, 9 representatives from 9 systems, listened to all of it. Lyra sat in the gallery and did not move. Carol presented Lyra's document, the one built from the Vorathi's own charter, in the 3rd hour. The chamber went very quiet when they reached the relevant clause. The Vorathi representative requested a 30-minute recess. The chamber granted 20. Caleb heard about this later, from Carol's brief, encrypted message that said, "They read the clause and asked for a break." That's not nothing. He read it 4 times. Neva beat him at the card game 17 times. He suspected the rules changed whenever he was about to win. Saya, without looking up from the brief, said, "She has beaten Pete 43 times. "Does she ever let anyone win?" Caleb asked. "She let Neva win," Saya said, 3 times, the first week. She paused. "Lyra does not let people win things. She thinks it is unkind." Caleb thought about that for a while. The ruling came 6 hours after the hearing ended. It came as a text transmission to Carol's station, and she read it standing up. Phyllis read it over her shoulder and made a sound that was not quite a word. The concordance found in favor of Earth's petition. The Vorathi's claim of property rights was ruled invalid under Section 14 of the collective's own charter, as the 3 individuals met the defined criteria for autonomous cognitive agents. The wristbands were ruled to be unlawful restraint, and their deactivation and removal was ordered to be facilitated by any willing medical authority. The 3 individuals were recognized as persons under concordance law. It did not look like what Caleb had expected. He had expected it to arrive as something enormous, some great moment of light and sound. Instead, it came as a message on a screen in a prefab building in the New Mexico desert. Umber and Carol's voice over a crackling connection saying, "We won." He told Saya first. She put down her brief. She was still for a long moment. Then she said something in her own language, something quiet and layered, that the translator didn't catch. She didn't explain it. He told Neva second. Neva went very still, the way she went still when she was feeling something large and didn't yet know what to do with it. Then she picked up her pencil and went to the big drawing on the wall and added something to it. He didn't see what until later. She had added, in the lower corner of the 6-foot sky, a small group of figures standing on the ground, looking up. She had written underneath them, in careful English letters, the words, "Still here." Lyra arrived back the following afternoon. The shuttle landed at the temporary pad outside the facility, and Carol got out first, looking exhausted and satisfied in equal measure. Phyllis followed, already on her phone. Then Lyra. She stood in the desert light for a moment. The same desert she had stepped into the morning of the crash, when Caleb had been the first one to reach the hatch, and she had said, "We do not resist," and he had stared at her because he hadn't known what to do with that. Caleb was standing at the edge of the pad. She walked toward him. "Carol tells me you stayed," she said. "Oh, there was nowhere I needed to be more," he said. She looked at him with those water-deep eyes, and for the first time since he had known her, the careful watching quality in them was not caution. It was something else. Something she was letting through rather than guarding against. "The bands will be removed next week," she said. "The medical team arrives Tuesday." "I know," he said. "I'll be here." "I know you will," she said. And the shadow of the smile came back. And this time, it didn't stop being a shadow. It moved all the way through her face, slow and real and cautious and entirely genuine. The smile of someone who has held the door closed on hope for a long time and is finally, carefully, letting something in. Caleb smiled back. The straightforward kind. The kind that didn't know how to be anything other than what it was. "Come on," he said. "There's coffee." "Good," she said. Behind them, in the common room, Neva was already showing Saya the new addition to the drawing. Pete was trying to read the words Neva had written and getting the pronunciation almost right. Saya, without looking up, corrected him once. He got it right on the second try. "Still here." The wristbands came off on a Tuesday, the way Lyra had said they would. The surgical team was 4 people, led by a specialist named Dr. Renata Kim, who had spent the past 3 weeks studying the imaging results and running simulations, and still called it the most precise work of her career when it was done. The procedure for each band took 2 hours. They went in order, Saya first, then Neva, then Lyra. Caleb was not in the room for any of it. He sat in the hall outside with his back against the wall and a cup of coffee that went cold, listening to the quiet. Pete sat next to him for the first 2 hours and then had to leave for a debrief and apologized 3 times on his way out. Carol came by, looked at Caleb, and left without speaking, which was its own kind of communication. Saya came out first. She was rubbing her wrist where the band had been. The skin there was lighter than the rest of her, a pale oval where 14 years of coverage had kept the light away. She looked at the spot for a long time, and then she pulled her sleeve down and said to Caleb, without ceremony, "Your Dr. Kim has very steady hands." "I'll tell her," Caleb said. Saya nodded and walked away. Straightforward, already on to the next thing. The grief of the moment carried in her body without her face admitting it, which Caleb thought was one of the most human things he had ever seen. Neva cried, only a little and briefly, and then she was done. She came out with red-rimmed eyes and her chin up and went to find Pete without explanation. Caleb heard from down the hallway the sound of Pete saying something clumsy and kind, and Neva making a noise that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same family. Lyra was last. She came out of the room with Dr. Kim at her side, and she stopped when she saw Caleb. She held up her wrist. The oval of lighter skin was the same as Saya's. The same pale absence where something wrong had lived for a very long time. She looked at it. Then she looked at Caleb. He didn't say anything. She came and sat next to him on the floor, which surprised him, because she had always been precise about chairs and proper seating and the maintenance of appropriate distance. She sat with her back against the wall and her wrist turned up in her lap. "I did not feel it come off," she said. "I thought I would feel something significant, but it was just gone." "Does that bother you?" Caleb said. She considered. "No, I think I wanted the ceremony of it. But the result is the same either way." A pause. "I have been thinking about what comes next." "Yeah," Caleb said. "Carol has offered a formal residency arrangement. Phyllis is working on the documentation. The concordance ruling provides the legal foundation." She paused. "I will accept," Saya has already accepted. Neva is going to attend school. I heard, Caleb said. She is furious and terrified, Lyra said, but she pretends to be neither. She learned from someone, Caleb said. Lyra looked at him sideways. That is a pointed observation. It was meant to be. The corner of her mouth moved, not the shadow anymore, the real thing. The smile that had been building for months, slow and cautious, earned against all the reasons she had not to allow it. What about you? She said. What comes next for Caleb Drew? It was the first time she had used his full name. He noticed. It landed differently than he expected, like a door opening. I've been reassigned to the facility, he said, officially, as ongoing liaison for non-human contact. He paused, which is a title that means I make coffee and ask questions and make sure everyone has what they need. You have been doing that since day one, Lyra said. Turns out it's a real job, he said. She held her wrist up again, looking at the lighter patch of skin. When I was 17, she said, and they put these on. I told myself that one day they would come off. I did not actually believe it. I told myself because I needed something to tell myself. She lowered her wrist. They came off, she said. Caleb looked at her. They came off, he said. She turned her head and looked at him, and the full weight of those watercolored eyes was there. But it was different now. The caution was still present, would probably always be present, layered into her the way 14 years of anything layers into a person. But behind it, moving through it, was something else. Something she was allowing. I have not known how to want things, she said. For a very long time. It was not safe to want things. I do not yet know how to do it without flinching. That's okay, Caleb said. I am telling you, she said carefully, because I think you should know the difficulty before we proceed. Before we proceed, he repeated. Yes. He looked at the floor for a moment, then at her. I'm familiar with difficult, he said. And I'm not going anywhere, and I make good coffee. Adequate coffee, she said. High praise from you. The shadow of a laugh, the first one he had heard from her, brief and low, and then gone. But it had been there. He had heard it. Down the hall, Pete was saying something to Neva in her own language, slowly and wrong. And Neva was correcting him with the patient exasperation that was becoming, in its own way, something like affection. Saya appeared at the end of the hallway, looked at Caleb and Lyra sitting on the floor together, and very deliberately went the other direction. Caleb caught the smallest movement at the corner of Saya's mouth as she turned. Carol appeared 20 minutes later with a stack of documents and stopped when she saw them. The residency paperwork is ready to sign, she said. Give us 5 minutes, Caleb said. Carol looked at Lyra. Lyra looked at Carol. Carol said, of course, and left without pressing, which was how Caleb knew she was pleased. Lyra looked at her wrist one more time. She pressed her opposite thumb gently against the light oval of skin, holding it, acknowledging it. Then she let it go. 5 minutes is sufficient, she said. She stood. She offered Caleb her hand, the one that had been bound, palm up, an open and deliberate gesture. He took it. They walked down the hallway together, toward the room where Carol was waiting with papers that said, in the language of law and precedent and 30 pages of formal documentation, what Caleb already knew and what Lyra was learning. That they were here, all of them, and that here was the beginning of something. and that the thing about beginnings was they required no ceremony, only the willingness to step into them. Outside, the desert was wide and bright. Neva's drawing was still on the wall of the common room. 6 feet of stars and the small figures standing below them. Still here, and they were, all of them, still here.